back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. So I was just listening to Knockout Boxing. Ah, he is exactly what I accused him of from day one, and that is a PBC fanboy. He always was a PBC fanboy, and more that's just being exposed. And the irony is, this is a guy who supports the PBC over Top Rank, Golden Boy, Matchroom, and everyone else historically. Always was critical of all those guys, but always fucking protective of Al Heyman and the PBC. The irony is, this promotional company that he's protective of, God only knows why, primarily is mostly put on Mexican American and Mexican fighters on their cards, stack their cards full of Mexican fighters, right? But yes, I know they're all about the culture. He's saving the culture. He's doing it for the culture. No, he's doing it to fill his pockets like every other promoter, but okay, if that makes you sleep better at night. The irony is, this dude supports a promotional company that literally put out 5 fight cards in 2024. 5. If you're a boxing fan and you only support the PBC, I think you're anti-American. Because what you're doing is you're driving the sport fucking in the ground with this minute mentality of what you think the sport should be doing and how the sport should be being run. Because in America, they've driven the sport down to the ground to the point where fucking the PBC puts every single fight on pay-per-view. If you want to ask why boxing is dying in America, that's exactly why. Thanks to Al Heyman and the PBC. People that literally only put out pay-per-view cards, charging $85 for mediocre cards that are not fucking pay-per-view. Right? But if you don't pay for them, you're anti-American. No, because as a businessman, a person, a consumer in America, the whole point is, if the market wants you to buy something, they need to fucking give you something that you want to buy. If they're not giving you something that you want to buy, guess what? You're not going to fucking buy it. You're not going to spend your money on a product you don't want, that you're not interested in. And unfortunately, 90% of what the PBC gives you is that. Products that you don't want, that you didn't ask for. And not only are they giving you something you don't want, but then they're fucking charging you huge fucking money for it. Because why? Because they need to. Because they've ruined their business, they've overspent, they overpaid, and now they're in a position where this is what they need to do to survive. But yet, if you want to support Matchroom or anybody else, if you want to support Riyadh and Saudi, then of course you're being anti-American, right? Just think about this stupidity. Because as a boxing fan, is this about you being American, or is it about the sport of boxing? Let's keep it 100. Boxing is global. And boxing obviously has events around the world. It's unfortunate, though, that a small minded group of individuals on YouTube who think that they are the voices of the sport only support boxing in America. And so if you listen to them, you'd believe that's the only thing that's happening in the sport, even though that's not fucking true, not even close to being true, right? We know boxing has been growing very well in other countries around the world. And because of that, the market in America has also been shit in the bed. So what happens? You gradually have fights away from the States. Why? Because the market's not what it once was. Boxing now is a secondary sport that most Americans don't even pay attention to, unless it's a Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight. That gives you a true indication of where boxing is in America, right? Guys like this, like Knockout, want you to believe that Tank Davis is the face of boxing, that he is pound for pound number one, a guy who's never unified, ever, right? Never unified. Why? Oh, yeah, no, it's not him. It's everybody's been ducking him. Sure. Everybody's ducking you. Isn't it ironic, though, when you look at a Canelo Alvarez compared to a Tank Davis. Canelo Alvarez, who is the face of boxing in America, and because of that, he generates money, and because of that, he's able to pay fighters the kind of money where they're not going to walk away from fights with him. Literally, they beg for fights with him because they know they're going to get career high paydays to fight him. If Tank Davis was doing the same thing, guess what? You wouldn't have this argument trying to say that people are ducking you and you can't get unifications, because you would literally have everybody chasing you and you'd have a long lineup of potential opponents. But unfortunately, when you're being cheap, when you're underpaying, when you're trying to take all the profits and not share it with your opponents, this is exactly what happens. You find yourself in a position where you're fighting second tier opponents because that's all you want to pay for. You don't want to pay for real opponents. You want to pay for second tier opponents. But then you talk about how you're the A side. I mean, the best thing I feel that could have happened is the PBC would have signed with DAZN early on in 2024 instead of this facade that guys like Knockout Boxing was bragging about and how great it was and how fucking, revolutionary it was. Talking about 12 to 15 fight cards this year. They did 5. Nowhere close to 12. Nowhere close to 15. 5. Right? And 4 of those were pay-per-view. One of them wasn't pay-per-view because an Australian promoter is the one that supported it and financed it in America. So, if you're so concerned with the PBC, as a PBC fanboy, what you should have wanted them to do was actually sign with DAZN, who is financed with Saudi Arabian money and other people, who is actually now taking over all the promotion for major promotion companies in the Western world and putting on one platform so it's far easier for boxing fans to support it. And this way it becomes far more financially accessible for people around the world as well. And it helps build American fighters globally, something they couldn't do when they were part of Showtime and ESPN Top Rank. Because believe it or not, Showtime and ESPN don't play outside of America. So you couldn't watch those events unless a country where you lived, some network picked up those rights and showcased it in your country. If they didn't, then you know what you were doing? You were stealing the feed. Why? Because that's the only thing you could do to actually watch the fights. Because they weren't thinking globally. They weren't thinking about how to build their brand and potentially make more money on a larger scale. No, they were thinking domestically. And because of that, they were overcharging because that's what they had to do, so they could generate enough money to pay for those fights. If they would have been more global, then they could have had their pay-per-views at $39.99. And you wouldn't hear people moaning and groaning and complaining as much as you do now. And because of that, maybe you could have done 10 fight cards this year instead of 5. But this label of anti-American, right? It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Because this is a guy literally who only makes videos talking about Tank Davis. Right? And he's accusing everyone of not paying for boxing, not paying for the sport. But this is a guy who's not supporting the sport, only focusing on one individual fighter and trying to use that so he can get paid off of boxing. Because he knows if he only talks about Tank Davis and then shits on all the potential opponents of Tank Davis, he's going to be able to make AdSense money. So literally that's all he does. But this is the kind of person you want to listen to, who's going to tell you how you should support boxing in America as an American. But you let me know in the comment section below. What do you think? Are you anti-American if you support Saudi Arabia? And then he even tried to go, oh, women, if you support them. You have to understand you have no rights in Saudi Arabia. The irony with this is, if you listen to so many Black Americans, they talk like they have no rights in America.